All right, so today we are going to start covering chapter 15, which covers all of infection control. Today we will focus on microorganisms and pathogens, specifically bacterial infections. This chapter is relatively in depth just because infection control is such a huge component in healthcare. So you'll be listening to several lectures. They will be broken up throughout the next week or so. But this one is super important because it just gives you the foundation. And then after that, we'll learn about ways to actually prevent infection. All right, so the very first thing that you need to know is that infections are spread by two different things. You have microorganisms and then you have pathogens. So your microorganisms are small living organisms. They're naked to your invisible eye, so you can't see them. You would need to see them underneath a microscope. So you have living organisms on your body right now. There are likely organisms even maybe surviving on your laptop if you're using it. Anything that you're touching, you potentially have those organisms living on them. So they're found everywhere in the environment. Obviously, again, like I said, they're found on your human body. They're a part of just your normal body. And so this is normal flora. So again, you do have, today we'll talk about bacteria. You do have bacteria that's inside of yourself. You have a lot that's actually in your gut. You have some in your nose. And all of those bacteria are positive. It's when those bacteria either are coming from an outside source, or maybe that bacteria that's inside of you then, comes into contact with another type of pathogen, then it can become something that's dangerous. So just know, not all bacteria is bad. Not all microorganisms are bad. It's just, again, it's going to depend on what is potentially causing them to then change amount, type, and so forth. So in general, most microorganisms prefer warm environments. They prefer darkness. So that's where, I don't know if anyone's familiar, but if you were to develop, let's say, a bacterial infection in your skin, oftentimes those are spread in places like your armpits. If you think like jock itch, if you don't know what that is, that's a type of infection that's spread in your pelvic area. Those are moist, those are dark. So those are just environments that basically are going to allow the organism to thrive. And so most microorganisms need some type of food. And again, that moisture, depending on the type of organism, they're going to need oxygen as well. And obviously your human body is just an ideal supplier of that. So again, if we're talking about the positive microorganisms that are inside, let's say your gut, your intestines obviously are going to be dark. They're going to be moist. They're going to have that food source that's coming obviously from your stomach. And then they're going to get the oxygen and the blood from the blood in your body. So those are other ways too that you're going to basically feed these organisms. And then you do have microorganisms that actually do cause infection and disease. So these are the ones that are called pathogens. So again, you have microorganisms all over your body, inside of your body. Those ones are fine. It's when they're actually germs or pathogens, that's when they actually can cause infection and disease. So I do need you guys to remember, if I ever refer to anything as a pathogen, just know it's just the medical way of saying a germ. All right, so you have three different types of pathogens that we will focus on in this chapter. You have your bacterial pathogens, your viral pathogens, and your fungal pathogens. So today we're going to focus on the bacterial ones. We'll talk more about the viral ones and fungal ones either tomorrow or Wednesday. All right, so in general, how does a pathogen or a germ actually cause infection or disease? So most of them produce some type of poison that are known as toxins. We kind of talked about this with like that medical term hemotoxin. And then some can even cause an allergic reaction, and then others actually can attach to your body and then destroy whatever cells they are invading. So these are more so the ones that are like viral infections. This one would be probably more fungal infection, and then this one is going to be more bacterial infection. So again, we'll talk more about it in depth, but just know that depending on the type of pathogen or classification of the pathogen, it's going to do different things to your body. All right, so bacteria. Bacteria in general is just simple. It's one-celled organisms. It can multiply rapidly. Bacteria in general can be an issue just because it does not need a living host to stay alive. So we'll talk about viruses in the next day or so, viruses need a living host in order to maintain survival, whereas bacteria doesn't. So bacteria can sit on surfaces for hours, days, weeks, whereas like viruses usually have a certain amount of time where eventually their viral load, they might still have a presence on, let's say, a surface, but their actual viral load to where they can actually infect someone declines relatively rapidly. And that's again because they need some type of human or maybe animal, other type of organism to basically survive. Bacteria in general is classified by different shapes and then also the arrangements. And you guys will need to know the differences. So you have your cocci bacteria. Cocci bacteria are round or spherical in shape. You have three major types of these bacteria shapes. So you have your diplococci. What it is a cocci in general is just, and it's a funny word to say, I know, but it's just a circular shaped, I guess, like microorganism. When they come in pairs, then they're known as diplococci. So a common medical condition that is caused by diplococci bacteria would be bacterial meningitis. So meningitis, we talked about this as a medical term, can be in two different forms. So you can have bacterial meningitis and viral meningitis. So bacterial meningitis can be caused by basically an arrangement of two spheres. You have your streptococci. These are actually arranged in chains. So it would be more you're having just multiple in a row. Common streptococci bacteria would be something like a strep throat. So if you've ever had strep throat before, just know that the arrangement of these little microorganisms are in chains. And then the last one is going to be your staphylococci. So these are basically arranged in clusters. So kind of just think like a bunch of circles stacked around each other, depending on the type of infection. It's going to have a different arrangement, but common staphylococci infection would be a staph infection. So staph infections are usually infections that are oozy and pussy. They're not kind of gross. They are gross. So people commonly can get staph infections from maybe popping a zit or a bug bite, or maybe they have an ingrown hair. For whatever reason, that bacteria gets into that opening, and then you scratch it, you pick it, whatever, and then it just spreads everywhere. So staph infections are harder to treat, and that's just due to the fact that they're arranged in a more cluster shape. You have your bacilli-shaped bacteria, and so these are rod-shaped. So they just kind of look like, I think of them as similar to like a rabbit food pellet or maybe a pill form, I guess. So again, this is not visible to the naked eye. You'd have to look under a microscope to see this shape, but they can occur by themselves. They can be in pairs as well, or they can also be linked together in chains. And the one thing that's unique about bacilli than the other types is they have flagella. So what that means is they have this little tail end, you can't see it in this, that allows them to swim. So basically they can move quicker, cause more spreading. They can multiply more rapidly because they have that ability. And then bacilli is also not fun because they can form these spores. So they can form basically like this little outer capsule that makes it more difficult for antibiotics, things like that, to get into it and destroy it. So they have like a more resistance to those drugs than other types of bacteria. And so common ones are going to be tuberculosis, which is also known as TB, tetanus, and then botulism would be another one as well. So TB, right now it's probably really difficult to contract, but you do need to get TB tests if you do plan on working in healthcare, and that's just because it's highly contagious. And then the tetanus and botulism ones, those are usually due to like coming into contact with some type of metal. And then there's a neurotoxin that basically is released in that as well. And then the last one that we'll talk about is spirilla. This one is in a spiral corkscrew shape. It can also kind of look like a little comma. And so diseases that are in this shape, again, this is still a bacterial type of infection, are cholera. So cholera is not something that we really have to deal with today, at least in America, because we're in a first world country. But cholera is found typically in untreated water, so just unpurified water, and it causes a lot, and it also can be found in food as well, but it causes like severe stomach flu. And so nowadays we know that if someone were to have this, then we just treat them with antibiotics. But like in the 1800s, cholera was killing thousands of people in Europe. And that was just because, again, it's contagious, and then they didn't have the appropriate medication to eliminate it from the body. And then syphilis is another one. So syphilis is an STD, a sexually transmitted disease. And so with this one, it causes like pus and sores. And I'm not going to go into detail, but it's just something you do not want to get. So again, just making sure, you're clean, things like that, so that this doesn't continue to spread. And then antibiotics in general are used for bacterial infections. So that's one thing you definitely need to take away from this lecture today. Antibiotics only treat bacterial infection. And I will continue to say this, but you cannot have a virus and think that it's going to be treated by an antibiotic. So antibiotics only treat bacteria. I try to remember it by bacteria starts with a B, antibiotics has a B. If that helps you, great. If it doesn't, maybe you can come up with something else, but just know that antibiotics are only used to kill bacteria. And then you do have some types of bacteria that have become antibiotic resistant. And so the reason for this happening is in America, especially years ago, they're getting a little bit better now. Anytime anyone was sick, like again with a virus or something, doctors would often prescribe antibiotics, knowing very well that that medication wasn't going to help their viral infection. But people always want a quick fix. And so telling them, oh, if you take this medication for 5 days, you're going to get better. Whereas in reality, it's most likely that they got better because they just let the, infection go through their body. Maybe they rested, drank lots of fluids, which is what you should really do for a virus. So again, that overprescription of antibiotics has now caused our body to learn that, okay, well, it's not a foreign thing anymore. It's not going to attack stuff. And so then, we just become resistant to it. And so anytime you have an antibiotic resistant type of infection, again, it's not going to make normal antibiotics function properly. So like penicillin is a common antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Amoxicillin, if you've ever had like that pink, creamy medicine, maybe when you were sick, that would be a type of antibiotic. So again, those are intended to basically kill the bacteria, but because we've been using them for too many times for reasons that are not necessary, our body then becomes resistant to basically not the medication, but the medication just doesn't function as well. And so if that's the case, you have things like MRSA. MRSA is something that is highly contagious. It is something that if you were to come into contact with it in a hospital setting, you're going to have to be wearing PPE for this. And so MRSA just stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So again, it is a type of staph infection, and then it is methicillin-resistant. So it's resistant to penicillin and amoxicillin. So this is just an example. And I don't know what actually happened with this person's hand, but I can kind of get an idea. They probably had some type of cut on their hand. And then for whatever reason, MRSA, that bacteria, that staph infection, got into that cut. And then MRSA is not only contagious, but it actually starts to like destroy the tissue around. So you see that black stuff, that is not just dried blood, that's actually dying tissue. And so MRSA can basically eat that tissue away. And depending on the severity or how bad it gets, they actually might have to either cut out large chunks of the tissue because it's dead, or they might actually have to amputate. So again, you can have MRSA and it doesn't lead to crazy serious reactions. I know I've had athletes before that have had this, not so much at the school, and they were fine, but it can get bad if you don't actually get it checked out. So again, this is kind of graphic, I understand, but this is a medical class, so hopefully it didn't gross you out too much. So we're going to just stop there today because tomorrow we will focus on viruses. But just make sure you're turning in your notes by the end of the period. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good day.